Welcome to our deep dive into the world of social media. We've got a ton of stuff to go through today, articles, research, even personal notes from you guys. Seems like everyone is really trying to figure out how this whole digital age is impacting us.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's something we're all dealing with in some way these days. And the stuff you sent covers like all sorts of angles, the actual neuroscience of our social media habits, but also the wider impact on society. Should be a really interesting deep dive.
Yeah, I feel like we're about to go behind the scenes, and honestly, I'm kind of nervous about what we might find. But before we get into all the psychology of it, maybe let's start with the sheer scale of social media. Like one of the things mentioned there are over 4.7 billion people using social media globally.
Wow, yeah.
It's more than half the planet.
It's crazy when you think about it like that. It really shows just how deeply social media has become part of our lives, you know what I mean? And it's not even just about how many users there are, it's how much time we're all spending on these platforms. On average, it's something like 2.5 hours every single day. And I even saw some estimates saying people spend almost 95 minutes a day just on TikTok alone.
95 minutes on TikTok, wow. That's like watching a whole movie.
Huh.
So it's definitely not just some casual thing anymore. We're talking about a huge chunk of our waking lives.
Mm.
What I find so interesting is why we're so drawn to these platforms. One of the articles you sent actually compared social media to a slot machine, which is kind of scary when you think about it.
Oh, yeah, that's a good analogy. I think it really highlights how dopamine plays a part in our social media habits. It's like every time we see a notification, a like, or a comment, our brains give us this little reward, this burst of dopamine. And that's the same chemical, by the way, that makes gambling so addictive.
So we're not just like connecting with friends and sharing photos. There's actually this deeper brain chemistry thing going on that's keeping us hooked.
Exactly. And that's where persuasive design comes in. Social media platforms are kind of designed from the ground up to use our brain's reward systems to their advantage. I mean, think about things like infinite scrolling, where new content just keeps loading as you go, or even personalized algorithms that basically show you exactly what you want to see so you stay engaged for longer.
Hold on. So you're saying these algorithms are learning what I like, what I prefer, and then using that to keep me hooked. That sounds kind of manipulative, doesn't it?
Well, it's definitely complicated, right? It's true that personalization can be really helpful in some ways. It can make sure we see content that's actually relevant to us and makes our online experience better. But on the other hand, it can also create these echo chambers where we're only ever seeing information or opinions that already fit with our existing beliefs. And that can lead to something called confirmation bias, where we just automatically favor information that supports what we already think and kind of dismiss anything that challenges us.
So what you're saying is I might be missing out on other perspectives
Yeah.
or even just facts because the algorithm is showing me what it thinks I want to see.
That's definitely a possibility. And this goes beyond just our personal beliefs, too.
Yeah.
This kind of algorithmic filtering can actually contribute to things like political polarization and even the spread of misinformation, which is, pretty serious stuff.
Okay, so that's definitely a bit of a darker side to the whole social media story. But before we get too deep into the negatives, you got to acknowledge that there are positive sides too, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's really important to remember that social media can be this amazing tool for connection, especially in a world that's getting more and more globalized all the time. It helps us stay in touch with loved ones who might live far away, join online communities based on things we're passionate about, and even build friendships with people from all over the world.
That's so true. I reconnected with friends from high school, found some amazing support groups for hobbies I love, and even learned about different cultures through social media. It's definitely given me a sense of belonging and helped me see the world in ways I never would have thought possible before.
It really does open up so many doors. And let's not forget the whole self-expression thing, right? Social media gives people a way to share their creativity, what they're passionate about, just their unique voices with the world. I mean, think about artists showcasing their work, writers sharing their stories, or activists raising awareness for important causes. They're all using social media in such powerful ways.
It's amazing how social media has really democratized access to information and given a voice to people who might not have had one otherwise. You're right, it's definitely not all bad.
Not at all. It's a complex tool with both positives and negatives, just like anything else. But even with all the good it can do, we can't ignore the potential downsides. And one of the biggest ones is the impact it can have on mental health.
Yeah, a lot of the stuff you sent talked about how social media can contribute to things like anxiety, depression, even body image issues.
Hmm.
One study I saw even suggested a link between heavy social media use and like a decline in real-life social skills, which is pretty wild.
Yeah, and that makes sense when you think about the whole social comparison thing. When we're constantly being bombarded with pictures of other people's seemingly perfect lives, their vacations, relationships, achievements, it's easy to start feeling like we're not good enough or that we're missing out.
It's that whole highlight reel thing again, right?
Oh.
We're comparing our everyday lives to these carefully curated versions of reality that people present online, and it's just not a fair comparison.
Exactly. And it's not even just comparing ourselves to other people. Social media can also make us feel like we have to present this perfect version of ourselves to the world, which can be really draining. It's like we're constantly trying to create this online persona that might not even reflect who we really are.
So it's not just comparing ourselves to others, it's comparing ourselves to this idealized version of ourselves online, too.
Yeah.
That's got to be exhausting. And then there's the whole addictive nature of social media. You mentioned the dopamine thing earlier, but it feels like there's even more to it than that.
There is.
Yeah.
These platforms are designed to keep us scrolling and clicking for as long as possible, right? They use these sophisticated algorithms and all these tricks to trigger those dopamine rewards and keep us coming back for more.
One of the articles mentioned something called variable reinforcement schedules. I have no idea what that means, but it sounds kind of technical.
It is a bit technical, but it's basically the reason why slot machines are so addictive. The rewards are unpredictable, so you might win big one time, then nothing for the next 10 times. And that keeps you hooked because you're always hoping for that next win, that next rush.
And social media uses that same principle.
Yep, exactly. We never know when we're going to get that notification, that viral post, so we keep checking, hoping for that dopamine hit. It's a pretty powerful cycle that can be hard to break.
This is starting to feel less like connecting with friends and more like, I don't know, being trapped in some psychology experiment or something.
Huh, I get what you mean. But it's not all doom and gloom, I promise. Just being aware of these things is a huge step in the right direction. Once we understand how these mechanisms work, we can start making more conscious choices about how we use social media.
That's a good point. But before we jump into solutions, I'm curious about how social media affects different age groups. I'm especially thinking about teenagers and young adults who seem extra vulnerable to all the pressures and potential problems of social media.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Different ages definitely experience social media in unique ways, and teenagers are definitely a group we need to talk more about. Maybe we can take a quick break and then dive into the age-specific stuff after.
Yeah, for sure. You're right that the impact of social media isn't the same for everyone. Different age groups, like you said, experience it in totally different ways. And teenagers are a really interesting group to look at, I think. They're definitely one of the more vulnerable groups when it comes to this stuff.
It's funny because one of the things you sent actually mentioned how adolescence is this super important time for brain development, especially in the areas that handle social stuff and emotional regulation.
Exactly. It's all still developing during those years,
Yeah.
which is why social media can have such a big impact during that time. I mean, teenagers are already dealing with so much, trying to figure out who they are, self-esteem stuff, peer pressure, all of that. And then social media comes along and can kind of make all of that even more intense and confusing.
So it's almost like, what, adding fuel to the fire? Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Think about it. They're constantly seeing all these images of perfect lives, Like everything is curated to show only the best, most exciting moments. That can really mess with their sense of reality and lead to like these totally unrealistic expectations and comparisons.
Right. It's that highlight reel problem again, but
Yeah.
like times 10 for teenagers who are already so worried about fitting in and all that.
Exactly. And then you've got cyberbullying, which is a whole other beast. That can be absolutely devastating for a teenager's mental health. Like the fact that people can be anonymous online makes it easier for bullies to say and do things they probably wouldn't in person. And because it's all online, it can feel like there's no escape from the harassment.
It's just awful to think about what some of these kids are going through. One of the studies you sent found a link between more time spent on social media and higher rates of anxiety and depression in teenagers.
Yeah, that's something researchers are trying to get a better handle on, but it's definitely a worrying trend. It's probably a combination of factors at play, like the social comparisons we talked about, cyberbullying, and then there's that whole fear of missing out, that FOMO thing everyone talks about.
Oh yeah, FOMO, that feeling like everyone else is having more fun or doing something exciting that you're not a part of. I still get that sometimes.
We all do, right? And social media can definitely make it way worse. You're scrolling through your feed, seeing everyone's parties, vacations, exciting events, and it's easy to start feeling like you're not good enough or that you're missing out on something important.
And that feeling can be addictive too, can it? Like you keep checking, hoping to see something that will make you feel better or like you're part of the in crowd.
Totally. It's a vicious cycle, for sure. And while teenagers might be more susceptible to it, those negative effects can definitely hit people of all ages.
Oh, yeah, for sure. We were talking earlier about how young adults use social media for networking in their careers, which can be a good thing, but there's a flip side to that, too.
Right, absolutely. LinkedIn and those kinds of platforms can be super useful for building your career, no doubt. But they can also create this culture where everyone's constantly comparing themselves and competing with each other.
It's like everyone is trying to one-up each other with their accomplishments, their job titles, how perfect their work-life balance seems.
Totally. And just like with teenagers, that can lead to feeling inadequate, getting anxious, even burning out. You start doubting yourself and what you've achieved, even if you're actually doing really well.
It's crazy how social media just seems to make everyone more insecure no matter what age you are or what you're doing with your life. So if we're constantly seeing these like perfect versions of reality everywhere we look, how do we even develop a healthy, balanced relationship with social media?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? There's no easy answer, that's for sure. But one of the most important things is awareness. Just understanding how these platforms are designed, the ways they kind of play on our psychology, and the effect they can have on how we feel. That knowledge can help us make better choices about how we use them.
So it's not about saying social media is evil or anything, but just becoming more aware of how it works and how it affects us.
Right. Think of it like learning a new language. Once you know the rules, you can communicate better and avoid making mistakes.
Okay, I like that. So where do we start? What are some practical things we can do to actually have a healthier relationship with social media?
One thing that can really help is setting boundaries. Like, use those screen time tools that come on most phones and computers to actually limit how much you use social media each day. Start small and then slowly increase the time you spend offline.
So it's kind of like a digital detox, but without going completely cold turkey.
Exactly. And you can also be more intentional about what you're actually looking at online. Unfollow accounts that make you feel bad or trigger negative emotions. Seek out content that inspires you, teaches you something new, or just makes you laugh.
But basically curating a more positive and supportive environment for yourself online.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to take breaks, like actual breaks. A digital detox, even for a few hours or a day, can do wonders for your mental health and help you reconnect with the real world.
Ooh, a tech-free day. That actually sounds amazing.
Yeah.
But what about those algorithms? How do we deal with those? They're always trying to keep us hooked.
Yeah, that's a tricky one for sure. Algorithms are super powerful and they're always changing. But there are definitely things you can do to minimize their influence.
Like what? Can we outsmart them or something?
You can definitely try. One thing is to just be more mindful about what you're clicking on, liking, and sharing. The algorithm is always watching what you do and using that to decide what to show you. So the more you interact with a certain type of content, the more you're going to see it.
So if I keep clicking on those like clickbait articles or those drama-filled videos, the algorithm is going to keep showing me more of that stuff.
Exactly. So try to be more picky about what you give your attention to online. Focus on engaging with stuff that actually aligns with your values and interests. You can also try following accounts that offer different points of view or challenge your beliefs. It's about breaking out of that echo chamber.
So basically making sure we're seeing a wider range of perspectives, not just stuff we already agree with.
Right. And remember, those algorithms are designed to keep you glued to the screen, even if it means showing you stuff that's negative or controversial. So don't hesitate to unfollow, mute, or even block accounts that are bringing you down. You have the power to choose what you see online.
I'm starting to feel a bit more in control now. It's good to remember that we're not just like passive consumers of social media. We can actually shape our experience.
Exactly. And that brings up another important point, the idea of advocacy. We need to be demanding more from these platforms, pushing them to do more to protect our mental health.
You mentioned earlier how some platforms are starting to take this stuff more seriously, like hiding likes and providing links to mental health resources.
hmm
But is that enough?
It's a step in the right direction for sure, but there's definitely a lot more work to be done. We need to hold these companies accountable for the design choices they make and the impact their platforms have on our lives. There are some great organizations out there that are fighting for ethical design practices and policies that protect users, especially vulnerable groups like teenagers and young adults, and we need to support them.
So it's about using our voices to push for real change.
Exactly. And it's also about educating ourselves and each other about the potential risks and benefits of all of this. The more we understand how these platforms work, the better we can use them in ways that are healthy and positive.
You know, this deep dive has been so eye-opening. We've gone from brain chemicals to talking about how AI could change mental health care. It's amazing.
I know, right? And we've really just scratched the surface. The world of social media is always changing, so we need to keep learning and adapting to make sure we're using it in ways that benefit us.
So what do you think are the most important takeaways from all of this? Like, what should our listeners really keep in mind?
I think the biggest takeaway is just remembering that social media is a tool. Just like any tool, it can be used for good or for bad. It's about being aware of how it can affect us, making conscious decisions about how we use it, and fighting for a future where technology helps us with our mental health instead of hurting it.
That's a really powerful message. I think our listener is going to finish this deep dive feeling a lot more aware and in control.
I hope so. It's been great exploring all of this with you.
Same here. And to our listener, thank you so much for sharing your questions with us. We hope this deep dive has given you some new ways to think about social media and how to use it to live a happier and healthier life. And speaking of the future, I'm super curious about all those AI-powered mental health tools you were talking about earlier. Maybe after a quick break, we can dive into that.
Absolutely. Let's take a minute and then jump into all the exciting possibilities that are just around the corner.
All right, let's talk about the future. AI for mental health. That's got to be interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty mind-blowing stuff, and it's already happening.
You were talking about AI tools that could actually, like, help with mental health. Can you give me an example?
Sure, imagine your social media, right? But it can tell if you're struggling, like maybe based on what you're posting or how you're interacting. And then it could actually like offer help, resources, support groups, maybe even coping strategies, all tailored to you.
Wow, that's wild. But also kind of creepy. Like, I don't know if I want my social media reading my mind.
I get that totally. It's definitely something we need to be careful about ethically. Privacy is huge, and people need to be able to choose if they want that kind of help. These tools got to be opt-in, and they got to be transparent so people understand how they work.
So it's more about giving people the option, not forcing it on them.
Exactly. It's about empowering people to take care of their mental health. Like imagine an app, right? It tracks your moods, figures out what your triggers are, and then gives you personalized advice based on your needs.
That would be so cool, like having a mental health coach right in your pocket.
And for research, think about the possibilities. Analyzing tons of social media data could help researchers understand trends, spot warning signs, and develop brutal prevention strategies.
So it's not just about individuals, it's about improving mental health for everyone.
Totally. But like any new tech, there are risks. Bias in algorithms is a big one. If they're trained on data that's not diverse, they could actually make inequalities in mental health care worse.
That makes sense. So making sure these tools are fair and inclusive is super important.
Absolutely. And we got to remember, tech is just one piece of the puzzle. It's not going to replace human connection or talking to a professional.
So it's about finding that balance, tech and human touch.
Exactly. Tech can be a powerful tool, but it should help us connect, not isolate us.
Wow, this deep dive has been quite the journey. We've learned so much, from how our brains get hooked on social media to how AI could change everything.
It's crazy how much there is to talk about, right? And this is just the beginning. The world of social media is constantly evolving.
So for everyone listening, what's the big takeaway from all of this?
I think it comes down to this. Social media is a tool, just like any other. It can be good, it can be bad, it all depends on how we use it. It's about being mindful, making good choices, and pushing for a future where technology helps us, not hurts us.
I love that. It's about taking control, being informed, and using our voices to make a difference. Thanks for sharing your expertise with us today. This has been a really fascinating conversation.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And to all our listeners out there, thank you for tuning in and sharing your curiosity with us. We hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought and some tools to navigate the world of social media in a way that's healthy and positive. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.